Jonah suddenly started to wiggle in his seat, trying to get his fingers down into the front pocket of his jeans. He fished out a business card and held it up. "I have a way. Head for the pier." It took all of Jonah's persuasiveness and star power to get Bill Hannigan to agree to meet them. It was a busy night at the port, and Mr. Hannigan was in charge of making sure every ship met its berth safely. Dressed in a slicker and hard hat, he checked his watch impatiently as Jonah and the others arrived. They huddled against the rain as Mr. Hannigan listened to Jonah's explanation of how he'd been researching at a pier and overheard the information about setting off an explosion on the Aurora. Hannigan checked the manifest. "It's refrigerator parts from Suriname," he said. "Pipes, liners, coils. But the ship's captain was arrested 3 years ago for illegal weapons trafficking," Amy said, showing him the article on her tablet. "He works for James Atlas. And I heard the guy mention his name," Jonah said. "I know who Atlas is," Mr. Hannigan said with a deep frown. He looked out at the pier where the Aurora was docked. "Haven't cleared the ship yet. The crew is still aboard." "I guarantee you, Mr. Hannigan," Jonah said, "something funky and explosive is on that ship," Mr. Hannigan corrected, but his gaze was hard as he stared at the Aurora. "What are you going to do, sir?" Ian asked. "There really isn't any time to waste. The thing is," Mr. Hannigan said, "doing my job is as much about instincts as your job is, Jonah." He spoke into a walkie-talkie. "Security, I have a level 5 alert. Yes, you heard me correctly. Meet me on the deck of the Aurora, now." They found Atlas with the captain in the wheelhouse. Atlas wore a bloody bandage on his head and an expression of deadly rage when he saw Ian, Amy, Dan, and the others walk in with Mr. Hannigan. "Bump your head, Atlas?" Mr. Hannigan asked. "Do I know you?" Atlas said coolly. "You're about to." Atlas flicked his gaze to the group. "You're listening to children's stories. None of your business." He turned to his 2 security officers. "Detain them," he said curtly, and suddenly the executive in the gray suit they'd met the day before turned into an action hero. He began to snap orders, ignoring the captain's bluster and Atlas's threats. "This is legitimate cargo, and you are wasting everyone's time," Atlas said. You'll be sorry you did this," he said, the words lightly. He was a man who didn't need to threaten. Just his presence there was enough. Atlas took a step toward Hannigan, just a half step. His voice was low. "Moving cargo is what I do. Delays cost me, and what I'd say a great deal, and what I'd pay a great deal to avoid it. That's why I have friends in high places. A bribe, a threat." Amy felt the charge between the 2 men. What sickened her was that of the 2 of them, Atlas was far more powerful. He had billions of dollars behind him. Hannigan was a good man in a tough job. She'd seen a whole lot of injustice in the world in the past few years. People who suffered, people who died, people who got power and didn't deserve it, people who got pushed around. Life isn't fair, her math teacher, Mr. Elicidi, used to say when they'd moaned about a surprise quiz. How could she, that 12-year-old Amy, sitting in class, worried about a quiz, have known how deeply true that was? That sounded like you are bribing a port official, Hannigan said. He spoke into the walkie-talkie. Search every corner of this ship. Atlas looked at Amy. You're dead, you know, he told her. He said it as though they were having a conversation. I don't care if you're a kid. She gave him a cool glance. I don't care if you're a criminal. Look me up when you get out of jail. Much later, they stood on the pier as Atlas and the captain were loaded into a vehicle. Snow swirled in the lights. Atlas and the captain had been arrested on at least 5 charges of having to do with bribery, violation of international law, arms trafficking. As Hannigan said, I threw the book at them, and it's a very large book. Here's the thing, Hannigan said, turning up his collar against the snow. The ship wasn't going to blow up. We know that for sure. You got that part wrong, but I'm grateful for what you got right. They were running mortars and automatic weapons to Suriname. It's enough to put them both away for a while. He cocked his head at Jonah. See? We do get drama here occasionally. Word, Jonah said. But Jonah looked as worried as the rest of them. They'd been wrong about the Aurora. But that didn't mean the city was safe. It just meant that their best shot had fizzled. Atlas made a lot of threats against you, Amy said. Part of the job, Hannigan said. And it's in my blood. Both my father and grandfather worked on the piers. My great-grandfather was working the morning they got news that the Titanic went down. He was one of the men sent out from Halifax to search for passengers. Brought them back here to bury them. Dan half turned to focus on Hannigan. Titanic passengers buried here? Sure, Hannigan said. 150 souls were brought here and buried. Most of them out in Fairview Cemetery. It's worth a visit. It makes you really feel the tragedy of that disaster. In the Maritimes you'll find the crosses, Dan said. Exactly. Dan looked thunderstruck. He stuck out his hand and shook Hannigan's heartily. Thank you for believing us tonight. Best of luck. Thanks, Hannigan replied, smiling a little at Dan's abruptness. I'd better get back to my office. Make sure all the ships are safely berthed. He said his goodbyes and walked off. Immediately, Amy turned to Dan. What did you just think of? She demanded. We got it all wrong, Dan cried. Totally. He recited the poem. A collision caused the terrible losses. In the Maritimes, you'll find the crosses. He was talking about the Titanic. All of the rest of the poem fits, too. It happened in the middle of the night, so people were in their pajamas. Wait a second. What about maiming and blindness? Amy asked. On Mont Blanc rests the ones to blame. Oh, to maim, blind, and kill, and have no shame. Nobody was maimed or blinded in the Titanic disaster. That part isn't about the Titanic, Dan declared. It's about us, Amy, where we were when the outcast took over the mansion. On Mont Blanc, the real one, the mountain. He was letting us know that he knew exactly where we were and what we were doing. But you didn't blind or kill anyone, Kara said. No, Ian's voice was quiet. Amy and Dan didn't. But Ted Starling was blinded in that explosion in Philadelphia. Ned Starling was maimed in a way. He never really recovered. If you were a crazy lunatic, you could blame them. Blame all the Madrigals, I guess, because of what the hunt did to Cahill's. Amy put a hand to her mouth. He's blaming us for everything. That's why he took over. Do you see what this means? The city is safe, Dana exclaimed. But something else is going to happen, Kara said. And now we might be too late. We wasted so much time. 2.5 days. There's less than 3 days left, and we haven't figured out the target. Jonah had been busy working his phone. He drew in a breath. I've got the target, he said. Look. He held out his phone. They all crowded in to scan the news report. That's tomorrow, Amy said.